What's up, OOUXers? As a huge fan of the atomic design philosophy and Brad Frost himself, I am super excited to share this conversation with you. As you probably know, Brad Frost is the author of Atomic Design, the creator of Pattern Lab. He's a design systems advocate and educator. He writes a lot of front-end code, and he also writes about writing front-end code and consults to companies looking to create successful, effective design systems. Overall, a really awesome human being. If this is your first time listening to the OOUX podcast and you are here because you are a front-end developer or design systems pro and also a big fan of Brad Frost, welcome. If you like this conversation, make sure to scroll back and listen to the first couple episodes of this podcast. I've got some really great introductory, if I do say so myself, really great introductory episodes, basically giving you an overview of object-oriented UX. And episode 3 is actually an interview with Dan Mall. Which you might expect complements this episode very nicely. Also, check out episode 25. That's with Miriam Suzanne and Sandra Ebby. So you might really enjoy that as well. As you might know, Miriam Suzanne is one of the leaders in the cutting edge of CSS. So also a very cool conversation. Okay, so just a few announcements before we get started. First, quick update on Cohort 6 of the OOUX certification course. We have been saying that Cohort 6 will kick off in January, but holy moly, it is already December, and we have 2 other really exciting projects we are trying to get out there, and like everything, it just takes longer than what I think it's going to take. So those 2 projects, it's an introductory, very introductory OOUX course that we're going to be putting on Udemy that is going to be in collaboration with Joe Natoli, and also an OOUX handbook that will walk you through all the steps of the ORCA process. So those 2 things we are working hard on them, and we just want to really get them out before we jump into Cohort 6. That basics course, like I said, that's going to be on Udemy, and then the handbook is going to be, it's definitely going to be in an ebook form, and we're probably going to do some sort of print on demand as well. So those are coming. Okay, so if you are wanting to be part of that cohort that will be happening in February, not January, I strongly encourage you to get on the waitlist by going to OOUX.com/waitlist. There are very limited spots. We already have 4 times as many people on the wait list as we do have spots. So if you're wanting to join Cohort 6, get on the wait list and really just watch your inbox for that. Most likely we're going to open enrollment in the beginning of January. We're only going to email you when enrollment opens. I promise to respect your inbox. So this, if you don't know, this certification course is a 10-week course that will work wonders on your design process. But don't take it from me. You can go to OOUX.com/testimonials. Oh, I said that weird. OOUX.com/testimonials to see what certified strategists say about OOUX and the course. So you'll see words like life-changing, game-changing. Those kind of words are used. And actually, I really enjoy one of the newest testimonials from Jacob. Thank you, Jacob, for this one. He says at the end of his testimonial, "Your only regret in taking this course will be that you didn't do it sooner." Whoa, that's pretty convincing, right? Here's another one that I also really love, another testimonial, a new one from Karen MacArthur. "I cannot fully express how thrilled I am to have discovered OOUX. It is just the perfect thing that I needed in my UX journey as I continue to take on more challenging work and face the uncertainties that our organization is working through. This approach really prepares you to become a better designer by asking the right questions to help the team gain a common understanding of the complexities we're facing through building a solid foundation on which to build a system, application, or website that is intuitive for our customers." So thank you, Karen, for that. If you don't want to wait until February, you can get started now by enrolling in the Self-Paced Masterclass, which is the exact same content just without the bells and whistles of the certification. And if you decide that you want to upgrade to the certification when enrollment starts, a lot of folks are doing that. You just pay the difference. All right, so you're not going to pay twice. So you can see a side-by-side comparison of both those options at OOUX.com/training. Okay, enough of my peddling my course. Let's go talk to Brad. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Object-Oriented UX podcast, a podcast about tackling complexity head-on, gracefully organizing massive amounts of information, and designing scalable, future-proof, and of course, naturally intuitive object-oriented user experiences. An OOUXer is a powerful blend of information architect, business analyst, facilitator, and UX strategist. If this sounds like you or what you aspire to, you are so in the right place. I'm Sophia Prater, UX designer, chief evangelist of Object-Oriented UX, and your host. Let's jump into it. Brad Frost, welcome to the Object-Oriented UX podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so my first question for you is a little bit philosophical. Feel free to go back to childhood if you need to for this one. But
oh boy,
what makes you tick? Like, what is it? What do you think it is about you that makes you gravitate kind of toward this sort of meta work, like working on the work, kind of working on the design of the design/development process? What kind of personality traits is it? What kind of brought you to this type of work?
It's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. I think I learned a long time ago that there is a finite number of things that I can work on in a given year, right? It's like I could make a couple websites a year or something, right? But what I learned early on was that it's like I could write a blog post and then like have people around the world, sort of take that and run with it. And so it's like, there's a story from early on. It was like I made a thing called Pattern Lab, which is like back in the day is like I call it like a front end workshop environment, similar to.
I remember.
Like Storybook is now like the sort of predominant front end workshop environment or whatever. We could sort of talk about all that, but anyways, back in like 2013, sort of made this thing and went to a conference somewhere in Europe. And this person, we're just in a conversation, sort of one of the, after parties or something like that. He said, "Can I show you something?" I said, "Sure." He gets out his phone and he showed this kind of like remote control that he built for this like sort of software that I made, and he was like controlling it with his phone. And I was just like, that's just incredible. Like, I've never met this person. We were talking for a solid like 15 minutes before he was like, by the way, here's this thing that I like built on top of this thing that you made. Wow. And that for me is that's like one example. But just so many of these things where it's just like, wouldn't it be cool if, and put that in a blog post, and then you just see people take things and run with it and actually turn it into real stuff. And like that for me is just utterly incredible. And that's, I think, what sort of like led me down this road of it's like, let's actually work on, I don't want to say like, I'm an idea person, because that's not true either, but like, just this recognition of like there is a finite amount of things that you as anyone as an individual can create, but how cool would it be if you could sort of unlock other people to make cool stuff? And in addition to that, in a lot of my work, and I'm curious if this is the case for you as well, but it's like a lot of what I tend to see when in my design system consulting work, whenever we sort of duck our heads into a bunch of organization and have a bunch of conversations with people is a lot of sort of agony, is a lot of like pain, a lot of frustration, is a lot of like I don't really like my job because this stuff is so gross or whatever. And there's a real strong desire to just like actually make
Yeah.
my like clients' lives like objectively better. It's like, hey, you know that thing like you used to that used to take you used to hit save and it would like literally take 3 minutes to sort of see the result of the thing that you're working on and then to sort of get rid of that altogether. And it's just like that's making improvements in people's lives and like helping people work together and creating better cultures and creating better like just environments for people to sort of like collaborate together and stuff. So that's really it is you just sort of see a lot of the pain and frustration and to be able to sort of help with that by way of just sort of giving them better tools or processes or whatever is super addictive.
And did you, I mean, early in your career, did you experience that frustration too? Were you there? Like, I know, like, I'm nodding my head here. Like, I know for me, I also experience, I mean, the first 5 years of my career, I would come home crying a lot
Yeah.
because of the environment I was in, because felt like I was moving the deck chairs in the sinking Titanic. And I didn't really have a process to figure out like, how do I go into the hull and like actually make
Yeah.
systemic change? And I was in these environments that were incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
But I had really high idealistic ideas about what a career in design was going to be. And I love work. I also just really like work is play to me. Like I really love it. And it was getting squashed and twisted and it was becoming painful. And so that's where a lot of the OUX process came from, is just my pain. And then like when I
Yeah.
realized like, oh, wow, this is making my work so much more fun and so much more meaningful. I want to share that with other people. So were you in the thick of it, in the weeds, where you were feeling that frustration?
Yeah. I think that we're very similar in that respect. And it's like you were like a seed that was capable of growing into something amazing, but you were just sort of in like arid ground, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like it's lousy to feel that sort of disconnect where it's like I have big ideas around how this should go, but when you're especially earlier in your career, you're sort of low on the totem pole. It's
Right.
like you kind of and I guess that's it. You got to take your knocks, right? You got to take your sort of pay your dues, as they say, or whatever, before sort of getting into a position where you could actually sort of help drive things. And that's very much my experience. Like the first number of years of my career, I like to joke that I'm a salmon swimming upstream a waterfall process. Because as a front end developer, and this continues to be the case, it's like developers get crapped on. Like it is a one way flow downhill. And it doesn't matter about agile or waterfall or anything like that. It's like engineer. It's like let's like define the thing. Let's like do all this stuff. Let's go through 800 rounds of visual review, and then we'll hand this off. Developer handoff is the term, right? We will
Yeah.
hand it off to the developers who receive it, and they go, "What the hell is this?" And so that was it. That was my version of that, was just like receiving all of this stuff and going, this is all wrong. And like, why did you waste your time? You could have just talked
Oh
to
my
me
gosh. Yeah.
instead of like creating this 300-page deck. And I could have like built it in the amount of time. I could have built it 3 times over in the time that it took you to make that deck. So anyway, so yeah, so that was like my early days of my career, were sort of like receiving this stuff and sort of, again, like I have good ideas on how this could all sort of work better, but really not getting a chance to really sort of enact that stuff until a bit later on. So yeah. So
Yeah.
but I think that's, again, we all have to start somewhere. People are like, oh, you're a developer, you fit in this little Excel spreadsheet cell.
Yeah. I mean, we all have to pay our dues for sure, but I think we're probably on the same page, is that like what you're describing from a front end development perspective, and what I'm describing from, big picture UX IA thinkers basically working on at, the UI level, and working on basically being in a feature factory where they're not seeing everything stick together like that. And even the stuff that I was doing early in my career, like I would wish that on no one, like, not my worst enemy. I would wish them on that kind of being in that kind of environment. And I think like if we can help with how the work is done and how design and development collaborates, and business as well. I think business actually doesn't collaborate as doesn't kind of come into the design process the way that it should. If we can bring that together, it's not only making those folks on the product teams more self-actualized, if you will, and come home and sleep better at night and all that good stuff, but it's going to make them make better products. It's going to make the end users a whole lot happier as well.
Yeah. It's you say it out loud and you're like, well, duh. Right. But it's so funny, like how rarely that actually happens.
So when you wrote Atomic Design, 2016 came out in 2016-ish.
I mean, the concept emerged in 2013, and the I sort of unveiled it in, was it 2014 or 2015? And the
Google
book
is wrong. The book. Okay.
The book came a little bit later. So the progression went as follows: concept, which I played out in my client work, to conference talk, to blog post, to book.
Right. Okay. All right. I'm following in your footsteps. Not quite there yet.
Yeah.
But when the concept started coalescing of Atomic Design, what was the motivation for it? Is it a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about, or was it something else? Was there something else that was making you angry that you were seeing in the industry that you were like, okay, we need to, like, there's got to be a better way to do this? What was your motivation there?
Yeah. So at the time, and I just looked at the blog post, it was 2013. So it was whenever so the climate at the time is like responsive design had come out, right? Yeah. So, and I worked at an agency for a number of years as a mobile web developer. And that was like back before responsive design was a thing. So this was 2009. And so I was making like M.dot sites for like Nike and MasterCard and Tiffany and Company and stuff like that. And I started working on a thing for iPad.Nike.com. That was a thing. It's like the iPad had not come out yet, and Nike, like they had like the inside track with Apple, and they like wanted it to like look cool whenever you go to Nike.com on the iPad whenever it launched. And so that was that. So we were kind of creating some experiences that were meant to go to their desktop website, to this new iPad site, they had an iPhone specific site, and then an M.dot site for non-iPhones. So four code bases for the same thing. So as a result, we ended up sort of creating like one experience that was flexible and could go and sort of slot into each of these like kind of like four frames essentially, right? So right. That became known as responsive design. What technically wasn't that. It's like the guts of what we were doing was very fluid and sort of, adaptive or whatever, but like it wasn't like all one site. But our experience was in essence a responsive website. So as responsive design came out, Ethan wrote his article. Everybody started sort of exploring this, how do we sort of create these more sort of fluid experiences and all of that. That got me into, and that was like what I was sort of wrangling and wrestling with in my day job. And that sort of led to a number of things, which is one, creating responsive web pages wasn't exactly the issue. The issue was well, navigation's hard. Like it's not every part of the page that's difficult to sort of make fluid and scalable. It's like some things are weird. Like navigation is horizontal on large screens. Like that's like a traditional desktop like primary navigation, but like on small screens, you don't have that space. So what happens? And that's sort of those kinds of conundrums is what led to a project called This is Responsive, where I basically kind of created a sort of little project that sort of rounded up, here's 6 different ways you can sort of adapt navigation to smaller screens. Here's how data tables work and like 6 different patterns for that. Here's how breadcrumbs work. Here's how, accordions and carousels and stuff can work, and so, things like that. And that's what really was like the first stab at being like, this is about the actual sort of component level stuff versus like a page level experience that you're trying to make responsive. And similar, like around that time too, Bootstrap came out. So Bootstrap, it's like, here's this kit of parts, here's buttons, here's alerts, here's all this stuff. And the sort of story around it was, here's these components and you could make pages out of them. And it's just like, okay, but that was like too coarse of a story, right? That was like it's like, here's parts, make a thing. It's a little bit like you've seen that, like draw the rest of the owl. You've seen that
draw the rest of the owl.
Yeah.
No.
Draw the rest of the effing owl is more appropriate, but it's like those step by step like drawing lessons where it's like first draw an oval and then draw an oval and then it's like and then draw the rest of the effing owl, which is just like this like super detailed illustration of an owl. And it's like, it's often those like step-by-step kind of things are too coarse, right? It's just like, oh, draw these couple ovals and then suddenly you'll have this like masterful sort of thing. That's the joke. It's well worth your time to look up. But anyways,
I have a very good visual of this. I know what you're talking about. It's like, here's step 1, here's step 2, and then it's done. And
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I had a friend trying to teach me calculus like that in college. She's like, you just do this and you do this, and then you have the answer to the problem.
It's all so simple, right? But yeah, so that was Bootstrap at the time. It's like it launched. There's this sort of general notion of kind of like components that sort of like make the whole experiences. And there's like nothing really in between there. It's like sort of a lot of that sort of was just kind of unclear. And so that's where I sort of leaned into, not through Bootstrap directly, but it was more that idea of, it's like we have these like kind of components and then we have these sort of like experiences we build with them. But I was like, there's more there. There needs to be more there. But like, and that's what led to this more kind of hierarchical. Let's actually like break this down even further to be like, if you were to explode literally any user interface into its smallest bits, what are you left with? And you're left with buttons, you're left with labels, you're left with like text nodes, you're left with like basically HTML tags in sort of, web development speak or whatever. So, and then sort of you combine some of those together into these sort of very small units, right? Like a label and an input field traveling together is its own little thing. And it can have some like helper text, but it's like relatively simple molecule. And then sort of from there, then you sort of compose all that together into a more complex thing. And then you sort of like build that stuff for there. So it's like, it was more sort of, rather than here's components and then here's pages, is like, here's this kind of component, these like basic building blocks. And then you sort of like put them together in like little small units. And then you put those together in even bigger units. And then you eventually sort of build these entire sort of templates. And then you can kind of like play out real product scenarios at the sort of page level. And that served as a really sort of helpful construct as we were tasked with our early projects in 2013, where we redesigned TechCrunch.com, the technology blog, and then Entertainment Weekly, which is like a entertainment sort of publication or whatever. And like these are they were great because it's like, okay, we have an article that like make the article template. And it's like, well, let's actually dig into that, because the article template is like, you could have just sort of walls of paragraphs, or you could have headings, or you could have an embedded YouTube video in there, or you could have sort of an embedded like chart or graph, or you could have, you know, multiple authors, like all of those different sort of, you know, more entering your world of like, you know, like here's all these different sort of,
and the author should link to the author detail page, and then you might have related content, and you might have a topic or something like that, and the topic,
right,
yeah,
all these scenarios, like what happens when there's 0 comments. And TechCrunch at the time was like notorious, like their comments section was like just the most like unhealthy community around. It was just like a lot of just like grumbly kind of people, but it was in turn very active. It was like, what happened? So in order to create the article template, you needed to be able to account for what happens when there's 0 comments, what happens when there's 10 comments, what happens when there's 13 layers of nested comments, like what does, you know, and you need to account for all these real use cases, and the underlying component system that is powering this experience needs to accommodate all of these real product situations. And so that was the crux of it.
And how are these comments organized? Are they organized by reverse chronological or chronological order? Can the user switch those comments? What can a user do to those comments? Can they upvote or downvote those comments? And I think it's so common that we just sort of, stakeholders and subject matter experts, even sometimes clients, will gloss over a whole lot of complexity. And I think it's part of our responsibility, and we can maybe get into this a little bit later, to like bring them in to the complexity, help in a way that makes sense to them. So we can get the time and space that we need to handle that complexity, and not basically just like pass it down to the user. Like, you figure out this complexity. I kind of sometimes say that we're the Tinkerbells of complexity. Like, we take it in so that our users don't have to, so that we can make it more simple for them. But what I think is really interesting, something you said about responsive design, and I think we were like in the same boat around that 2012, 2013 time. So that was when I was at CNN, and I was tasked with designing election results, which was the first thing that they did as a responsive design. So that was 2012, November 2012. And I had never done anything responsive before, and neither had the development team. Like, editorial had no idea what responsive design was. It was just, I mean, and just for like a little context, CNN.com did not launch as a fully responsive site until 2015. So it was like 3 years before everybody got on board at CNN. But I remember, like, basically responsive design was a catalyst for all of this thinking, that when I finally like really put all my thoughts together, I realized this is stuff that we could have been doing all along, right? Like, way before responsive. I could have been doing this in 2009, like making like kind of prioritization, like making sure that like we're prioritizing all the elements on the page, you know, really kind of gearing towards simplicity and creating a system of a reduced set of parts, like a minimal effective dose of parts. My granddad was a chemical nuclear engineer, and one of his I know this is not his saying, but he would always say, the more moving parts, the more likely it is to break.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what really internalized when I was trying to kind of task with designing page by page for election results. I realized I was like, I need to create reusable parts. Like, this is going to break with responsive design if I can't say like, here's a results card, and that results card, let's try to make that results card the same on all of these pages, unless we have a really good reason not to change it. So it sounds like for you, responsive design was a catalyst as well for a lot of this thinking that, you know, I mean, atomic design, we could have been doing that in 2004 or something.
And people were, and like, you know, there were sort of like early stabs at a lot of this. There's like things like YUI, which is like Yahoo, like user interface. And like there's a lot of like precursors to this. So it's like, I certainly didn't invent like component driven sort of systems and stuff like that. But at the same time, it really did like sort of meet the moment, I guess, where it was like it did sort of just like happen all sort of hand in hand. And I think like what you're describing a little bit too is this like this is where also the Luke Wroblewski's mobile first, I think, really
Mm-hmm.
played into it. Whereas like whenever you actually like put those terms together, mobile first responsive design, meaning like let's actually like use this as an opportunity to sort of like strip down this experience to its essence, focus on what the goals and outcomes of this experience need to be, and then and only then start actually sort of wanking around with the container. It's
Yeah,
like,
thinking
but
about
we're
layout, like does it go on
right.
the left or does it go on the right? Or like
And we learned and we've continued to learn that it's like, oh, it turns out none of that like layout stuff. It's not to say that like layout is totally like moot or unimportant, but it's like, boy, you could get a lot done with just a single column of text if that's really what you're trying to if you're trying to get people to sort of read words on a page. A single column of text actually fits that fits that
yeah,
job like very nicely. Or if you're looking for election results, just like sort of showing the election results in a pretty like sort of simple layout is pretty great. It's pretty
yeah,
great. It's so it was like it was this again sort of like a constraint drives innovation, and in a lot of ways where we were at a from an industry perspective was we kind of needed to sort of be brought back to earth and sort of become a little bit more user centric because the game changed, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Um, let's move a little bit into so we'll talk a little bit about this whole object-oriented UX thing. So I want first I want to say thank you for something that you've helped me out with in 2015. So that was my first OOUX article that I wrote on a list apart. And I don't know if you remember, I'm looking right now at a screenshot of your tweet from 2015. I took a screenshot of yours and a bunch of other Ethan Marcoe and Karen McGray and a lot of folks said really nice things about it. And I screenshotted those. And
Uh,
that for I mean, you had 47 retweets and 123 likes on this tweet. And I know for a fact that a lot of people found out about OUX through you. And you said fantastic thoughts, thank you, from Sophia of OOUX about pattern-based thinking and the modern web design process. And I was just hoping you could talk a little bit more about what you mean by pattern-based thinking and like why is that important for the modern web design process?
as far as patterns go, it really I think sort of comes back to what we've been talking about, which is it's like how do we with an uncertain landscape, it's like what are whenever you blur your eyes or sort of take a step out of the sort of very fast moving current of technology, you need to sort of like pull back and sort of like figure out how to sort of tackle that. If you don't do that, you get caught in that current, and unless you're Michael Phelps or whatever, you're going to drown. Like and I've seen that happen to a number of people, whether it's in my neck of the woods in the industry. It's like sort of keeping up with the Joneses and the modern JavaScript landscape and like this new framework, and then oh, that new framework is yesterday's news, and now you got to do this. And in sort of design world, it's all these things. Visual design is whatever flat versus skeuomorphic versus like whatever like the design trends are. It's like there's no shortage of areas. So wherever you want to duck your head
Mm-hmm.
into in the landscape, it's fast moving, it's trendy, it's like sort of this, that, and the other. Same happens in like the business side. It's like whatever you just like hear a bunch of business people suddenly talking about like the blockchain, and you're just like nervous laughter because you're like, yeah, it's like there's there is this like very, very fast moving layer
Right.
that happens, and it's just like sort of how this goes, whether you're in design, development, business, whatever. And like, so in order to make good stuff for people, you kind of have to not not ignore that fast moving current. You have to be aware of it. You have to sort of understand it, but it's better to be sort of like on the banks of that fast moving river rather than being in it and being sort of swept away. And why this matters for patterns is I think that it's just like we are able to sort of like from the safety of the banks of this fast moving river, sort of figure out the best sort of, like observe those, like sort of figure out what's going on and establish the right sort of solutions and patterns that could sort of, address this sort of fast moving landscape. And by not sort of just drowning and sort of getting swept up in it, you're able to sort of like take a step back, focus on the user, focus on what you're trying to get done at a business or, organization level, and then sort of like figure out how you sort of connect those dots with design and development and all that good stuff. But it's like that stuff, that thinking, that like lower level thinking is often missing, right? Like you were saying, like the feature factories or whatever, just like sort of this kind of like go mode. And it's like we need the thinking part of that, and the thinking part of that sort of, some results of that thinking process are solid patterns and solid sort of just processes and the just sort of sturdier, more stable ground by which we could operate.
Have you heard of pace layers? This reminds me of pace layers. So like, you have that kind of that top level pace layer, which is fashion, right? And then it kind of goes all the way down to the bottom where you have, I think, environment and culture, human psychology, that kind of thing. And pace layers comes up a lot on this podcast, a lot, but
for good reason.
And I never heard it described that way of like, it's good to be doing work at that fast paced level. Like somebody's got to figure out like the new and the cool trends, but it can be so easy for that to be really overwhelming and feel like a fire hose and feel really, it's really stressful actually. So grounding yourself in these slower moving patterns, right? And principles, can actually, even help you with that more fast-paced layer.
Yeah, it's that's exactly right. It's like you need people working. It's like ultimately this fastest pace layer is like where work plays out, because at the end of the day, well, I got to write code. And so therefore I need to make a decision on like how I'm going to write that code. And so that means I in essence, like need to pick which one of these sort of flavor of the week sort of, things to bite down on and use. So it's like, yeah, you do need to execute at that layer. But the big thing, and another analogy I use is, this is with a current client of mine. The analogy I use is like, basically what I'm seeing is a bunch of people out in the forest working as hard as they possibly can, just swinging away at these trees with the dullest of axes. And our job isn't to sharpen their axes, it's to give them chainsaws. It's like, but you need to be able to sort of be removed from that, those people that are all toiling away with these dull axes don't know any better. They don't know that there's like a better way to do this. But if you're zooming out and you're seeing 70 people in a forest, like just toiling away, you're like, well, clearly this isn't right. This isn't the most efficient way to sort of get this job done. And so you're able to sort of, come up with sort of solutions to that can make their lives easier and stuff. So it's that, and it comes back to that. And I should probably pick an analogy that doesn't involve destroying nature, which doesn't sit well. But let's say the objective is to clear this forest for whatever reason. But it's like coming back to what we were sort of your first question, which is like, why did I sort of find myself in this layer of work? Because I see a bunch of people toiling with dull axes, right? And so it's like, how can we as designers and developers and whatever, sort of that are a little bit operating at this like lower pace layer, how can we create tools and environments and processes and stuff that make those people that are sort of working and executing at that sort of like fastest pace layer, how do we make their lives better and make the work go better and make sure that everybody's aligned and also that nobody's crying themselves to sleep at night.
I know. I think that this is like really nicely transitions into something else I wanted to talk about, which is consistency. So let's talk about consistency. So design systems are really great for consistency around our, of course, voice, tone, color, style, UI elements in particular. So I think that you mentioned on another podcast that I was listening to with you on it, you were talking about an airline app. So you worked for an airline. I've also worked for an airline as well. So maybe we kind of meet there, but like, let's not have 7 different date pickers, right? So let's do that interface inventory, realize the problem first, that we have 7 different date pickers in our airline ecosystem, right? Because probably not just the app, we're probably looking at the multiple different types of apps and also the multiple different types of websites that are out there, because that adds a lot of cognitive load. You have a user moving from calendar picker to calendar picker, and they got to do a little relearning every single time, right? Yeah. Oh, the button's over here versus over here. And from a dev perspective, that's no fun. And also from a maintenance perspective, right? So it's like more work from like you just designed 7 things when you could design 1 thing. Now your user has to learn 7 things and your developer has to develop and maintain 7 things. So with design systems, we're thinking about that at kind of this UI level. So yes, 100%. So what I'm adding to this as far as consistency is I'm talking about, let's not have 7 different representations of the flight object. So if the flight object or the city object or the airport object are things within this ecosystem, let's not have 7 different cards that look slightly different. So I call these shapeshifters in the OOUX world. And, you know, sometimes you need to move things around because you're designing for that context. But a lot of times this happens unintentionally, right? Because we're designing page by page, or we have silos. So how do you see that kind of work? Like, you know, from an information architecture, from an OOUX perspective, going through and making sure like, all right, like, let's make sure that the flight object is really, really clear and consistent. So that's recognizable for a user. Because also like once things start shifting around, our lizard brains try to attribute meaning to it. And often there's actually no meaning at all. It's totally arbitrary. So how does the work that you do with like an interface inventory and figuring out, okay, we've got 7 different calendar pickers, does it match up with this? Like, oh, we not only have 7 different calendar pickers, we have 7 different representations of a flight, and it's completely arbitrary.
I think yes to all of that. And so we are working with United Airlines, and there's like meat and potatoes components like a date picker that obviously sort of like get used, you know, kind of a specific way all the time. But then there are sort of more, we'll say, sort of content driven components and patterns, things like cards. And like, so for the design system for United Airlines, we created a flight block component. And the idea was exactly what you're describing, which is also you have a flight object and there's some knobs you could tweak, which is to say, sometimes the time, like the departing time, is the most important object, like sort of piece of content in the mix.
Attribute or property.
Sometimes it's the, you know, it's the location, sometimes it's the date or whatever. But the idea is like, let's actually create a single treatment with the appropriate flexibility in there to be able to showcase date versus location or, you know, airport code or whatever. But it's like the idea is like, let's solve this at a holistic level. And then we can, you know, deploy this design solution, you know, wherever we need it. and it's always going to be the same to really sort of underscore and create that sort of consistent behavior for users. So people know whenever they look at this thing that they know that they're looking at, the same information again and again, which helps. Yeah, it helps in all the ways that you were saying earlier. So I think that like what we get into is this intersection between, and I hate this usually. I hate the conversations around the intersection between content, UX, and UI, and all that stuff. Just like it just gets into like this, all the sort of meme images, or it just gets very reductionist very quickly. But I think like what you're sort of getting at is it's basically like the content and the information architecture and all that sort of important stuff that needs to be thought hard about ultimately manifests itself through user interface, right? And so there's a relationship, and a tight one at that, in between like UI and like the kind of stuff that flows through that UI, and that you can't really just sort of treat those things as separate things. Because let's be honest, like if we were able to treat those things as wholly separate, we would just everyone would just use material design and call it a day. But that's not really what really what this is about. Like, because material design exists, why can't we all just like pick that? It's like if the issue was really making like a card, then it's like, well, there's a card right there. Let's all just use that. Let's just agree to use that, and we don't have to worry about anything anymore. But like the fact of the matter is that the kinds of content that get represented through that card influence the way that card is architected and constructed, and the way it looks and the way it feels, and all of that stuff. So it's like you just can't sort of totally decouple these worlds as like UX and UI and whatever. It's just, it all needs to, it all feeds into itself, and it should be like a two-way street as well, because sometimes there are sort of like UI constraints that like should influence the information architecture or the kind of content that it can support or whatever. So it's like, it all just needs to be considered together and hopefully concurrently.
Yeah, for sure. And how do you, so, oh my gosh, so many things just came up for me, but one, backing up, wait, what are the memes around the intersection of content and UX? What is that?
What's so this?
What you said, there's like a lot of meme images or something around like, this like,
oh man,
conversation. I'm not part of. I guess I'm not part of.
Yeah, I maybe I think this conversation has told me I'm on the internet too much apparently. Okay. And follow too many memes, and just like, I don't know, that's what I live for, I guess, is like funny memes. But there's UX UI. There's always there's a picture of like a cement sidewalk, and the cement sidewalk sort of like angles off at a 90-degree angle, and then it says UX is like the dirt path that like people use sort of shortcut, and it's these like very sort of reductionist, like kind of like like kind of like keeping them as like sort of separate things. And then I'll also say, I'll go here too, just because I don't care, is like, I think that like a lot of like sort of the UX community tends to or can skew a bit like academic, or like a little bit more highbrow, ivory tower-ish, whatever, compared
information architecture.
yeah. And then there's these sort of like blue collar, like sort of builder kind of people who are like toiling in the UI layer. It's but it's like it's all one and the same, right? Like at the end of the day, it's just, we love to just sort of remind ourselves and our clients and stuff whenever we get into these kinds of weeds. It's just like, hey, we're making websites. At the end of the day, there's a single thing that we're all creating. We're all hitting it from different angles. We're all bringing our respective perspectives to this. But at the end of the day, it's one thing that users are going to interact with. And so let's make that thing great. And that requires this very when it's framed that way, there's fewer turf wars and fewer like, this is my territory or I'm leading this or whatever. It's like, no, look, I'm bringing a development perspective to this. This person over here is bringing the business perspective to this. This person's here is bringing the UX, perspective to this. This person's bringing the brand and the visual sort of perspective, and it's all good whenever you get all those ingredients in there and present, and you come to the table as equal partners to make a good thing. But again, that sounds just commonsensical, but how rare it is for that stuff to actually happen.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, that's what I love about something like an object map is everybody can crowd around it. And it really is. It's like everybody can be these kind of equal partners. Maybe you have somebody facilitating, but everybody's voices can be heard and kind of go into like, what is the structure of this thing? Okay, now let's talk about how this structure manifests into UI. Okay, so we have a flight and it has like channeling Hipmunk. It has like a level of pain, right? Like remember Hipmunk used to have that kind of like pain level for this flight. We have an agony. Right? We have an agony level. Yeah. Okay, I could write that on a sticky note all day for agony, right? Backend developer needs to figure out how to calculate that. How are we calculating like what metadata is going into agony, like the length of the okay, we got length of layover, we have etc. How early is the flight? That's got to all go into actually what that value is going to be. And then we need a UI designer and a front end developer to start thinking about, okay, like how is that actually going to manifest? How are we going to show level of agony? Do we have like little pain icons or something like that? And then do we have something that we can already reuse, right? So I kind of all have that conversation together, one big happy family. So going back to consistency and naming is another thing, right? Naming is hard. So you might have like, okay, you call it an accordion, I call it a twirly panel or something like that. Okay, let's just call it an accordion, right?
I like that.
So then let's call it a twirly panel from now on. Panel. But what I found is this can happen in our objects as well. So when I was working with Delta, so you were working with United, I'm sorry, I was working with Delta. But anyways, airline wars aside, they had the concept of a flight, a trip, a leg, and a segment. And all of that in our business conversations, all those terms would get used interchangeably.
Yeah.
And we had to figure out like, wait a second, like which ones are synonyms? Like is a flight and a trip the same thing? And is a leg and a segment the same thing? Okay. And like, all right, so a leg and a flight are two different things, but there's a relationship between those things.
Yep.
So naming things and really figuring out what your objects are and how they relate to each other, because how they relate to each other is important for the user's mental model and navigation, but also when it actually ends up on a screen, like what things are going to be, embedded in each other. So a flight has an airport. So we've got an airport card that needs to sit inside of a flight card. So we're actually looking at these things in context, like,
yep.
How does that play out into your work where you're trying to figure out, especially on like complex business software, like what are the actual things that need to be represented in the UI?
Yeah, this is super hard. And I've sort of seen play out since I, for better and for worse, invented a buzzword. You see things get abused and misused, and like nothing gives me more just terror shivers than like seeing atomic design in some slide deck next to just some other jumble of buzzwords, and it's just like, oh dear. It's like like words are hard, and it's very, very difficult because things like just spill out and ooze, and people just sort of inadvertently kind of misuse, like you're saying. It's like use these things as synonyms and they're not, but like it's tough to sort of like pick those things apart and keep them separate. And like it depends on who's doing that sort of conflating. It's like, if it's like some person who's outside of the work, that's whatever. But like, if people inside the world that are supposed to be sweating these details are getting this stuff sort of are getting tripped up over the stuff, then that's bad. And this is a lot of times, like, we kind of talk about the design system layer cake, and this has really helped us to sort of establish the right layer in the cake that you sort of talk about certain things. So for instance, at the sort of like lowest level design system layer cake, this is actually like a good to use material design as an example, because it's a very good one and a tangible one. So it's like material design is like Google's design system. And of course, it's like a broader, more open design system that if you look at material design and like dump all the parts out on the table, it's like you see buttons, you see like form fields, you see all the sort of like standard fare stuff. Now, we all know Google products, right? There's YouTube, and there's like Google Maps, and there's like all these things. It's like, but you don't see that stuff represented at the material design layer. Material design is like, here's this like common, just meat and potatoes, like sort of these are the generic kind of containers by which our user interfaces come to life. There's a layer on top of that, presumably, and I haven't been inside Google's walls yet, but it's like there's the YouTube design system that would probably have its own, and we kind of call these like recipes, which is like, this takes the material design button group and sort of wraps them in like the sort of specific stuff, or like sort of contextualizes them in a way that makes sense for a video product, right? And then over here, Google Maps is sort of like wrapping up like these sort of like navigation nodes in a certain way, in a way that makes sense for their sort of specific product. And then sort of like, once you have this sort of like tiered sort of layer cake, you're able to sort of go, it's good for this word to exist, but it doesn't all get jumbled together. And this is like one of the things that we tend to have to do with a lot of our client work, is like kind of establish more of this like layer cake, where it's like, everything that you're doing is good and warranted and good thinking and behavior. But a lot of time people go like, oh, this system's thinking, so we're going to put all of our content sort of systems thinking, and we're going to put our voice and tone, and we're going to put like all of these like sort of different conventions, all these different systems, and we're going to call that a design system. And then it just ends up being this kind of like gross stew where like everything's kind of bleeding into each other, and you kind of don't know what goes where, and things get commingled and whatever. So what we tend to do is like sort of help establish these layer cakes, where it's like, all of this stuff is good. The content stuff lives at this layer, like, and over here. And like, this stuff lives over here. This product specific stuff goes over here. Oh, these UI components need to be facing content editors that are going to be interfacing with them in a CMS. That's actually a different layer than our like buttons and button groups and stuff like that. So it's like, it's really hard, because it's like, it is kind of sort of the same thing, meaning it's like, we're talking about systems and this is a design system, isn't it? But it's also important to sort of recognize that it's like, these things actually are a bunch of different sort of systems all kind of hanging together and having a relationship with one another. And that's tough, because it's like, it just requires a level of nuance that oftentimes like folks haven't arrived at yet.
Right. And that's where I see OOUX helping out, is like, how do we connect a conceptual model of things that the user is actually coming for? Because I hope you agree, like, no, the user isn't coming, even though that what they're touching are calendar pickers and drop downs and check boxes, like nobody's even coming to the website for the header or the footer, right? They're not coming for that. They're coming for, flights, articles, people, events, whatever those actual things are. So so as you know, Clarity Conference was last week, and I ran a workshop, and the wonderful designers and developers from REI were in the workshop. And with their permission, they said that like, we can talk about their website. I told them that I was talking to you, and I was like, is it okay if I bring up your design system? So their design system is Cedar, and they're doing amazing work. And oh my gosh, like rei.com is an amazing website. It's beautiful. It's super robust, but it doesn't feel too complicated or anything. But when I was looking at it, and when I was looking at just kind of looking at REI. So if you go to rei.com, you're going to see articles, you're going to see products, you're going to see buying guides. They have experiences now. You have stores, and stores actually have services, like they can like service your bike for you. They also have these experiences like teach your kid to ride a bike, and those experiences that have events associated with it. So you have like teach your kid to ride the bike, and here's like the 17 events where you can like actually sign up for one. It's very robust. There's people, there's experts, and all those things are not necessarily consistently represented. So you might have a product, like if I'm looking at recommended products versus a product card and the search details, they have two different product cards. It's like slightly different metadata, things moving around a little bit. And actually, like, are you looking at rei.com right now?
I am, yeah.
So on their homepage, it's beautiful, but like, here's another thing. So we didn't get into masked objects, and I want your opinion on this, because this is where like consistency gets into that generic design. Like, let's create a card and anything can go in it. It's so flexible. Right. So I want your thoughts on this. So if you go to rei.com, and everybody listening should go to rei.com, it's a beautiful website. They're doing great work there. Yet you have those three cards on REI. I need to actually look at it on rei.com. You have how to choose and use an indoor bike, indoor cycling workshop, and gear up for fitness beyond the bike. Are you seeing the same things I'm seeing?
Yep, I am.
So each of those are actually different things. So how to choose and use an indoor bike trainer, that's like an article / guide. Then we have an event is the second one. It's on November 4th. And then we have a product category that actually goes to a list of products. So three, in the user's conceptual model, three totally different things. Yet they look exactly the same. So you have, in the same way that with language, like we're all on a product team, and you can have it's people using the same word for different things and different words for the same thing. This can get translated visually too, where we're using the same homepage tile, probably is what it's called in the design system. That's so flexible, anything can go in it.
Yeah.
But what that does is that reduces recognizability. What are your thoughts on that and the balance between that, like, creating something that's flexible, yet also like tailored to that conceptual model?
Yeah, this is good stuff. And I like actually being able to sort of talk through, we'll say like a real world example, I think is really good. Coming back to this sort of notion of like material design, and then there's sort of like a layer that sits on top of it. We kind of call this like, there's like the sort of design system layer that's like the core design system, which is again the most like sort of content and context agnostic stuff, right? It's like buttons, form fields, and then card. And a card in our design systems tends to look like a box with maybe a shadow and maybe a border, and then but also maybe a variant that sort of like strips that stuff away, and it's actually like literally just an invisible box for different contexts and stuff. So that's that kind of layer. So it's like there's these like sort of structural ingredients that's as far as the design system can go, and then sort of and the layer on top of it, at the sort of product level, there actually might be a number of different assemblages of cards that have sort of different things. One for events, one that's more a product card, one that's more for sort of something else. And we tend to call those recipes, which is sort of a little sort of part of like the layer, because they're almost entirely composed of lower level design system ingredients, but they're arranged and composed in a specific way in order to do a specific job, like you're alluding to, where it's like this thing is like an event thing. So there actually might be like need to be like a badge or like a kicker or something that has like a date or something. Whereas a product card needs to have like price information and a call to action, things like that. Right. So it's like the design system card can't accommodate all of those use cases by itself. All it can basically do is a box. I might have like actual borders or I might not. And like it just focuses more on the sort of structural convention of it. And then the recipe layer is where you could create n number of combinations of these like different recipes where it's like, oh, we need a card that's conducive for events. We need a card that's conducive for products. We need variations of those things that it's like we're like sort of really shouting it for the rooftops versus it's like a related sort of one, like big versus small and things like that. Mm-hmm. So all that's to say is like we tend to sort of split out. There's like the sort of structural blur your eyes, just replace whatever the content is with like lorem ipsum and like placeholder images so that you like literally can't make any assumptions about what kind of content goes in there. And that's kind of the thing that lives in the design system layer. Mm-hmm. And then sort of at a layer on top of it is where you get into that nuance where you start getting into, okay, this is this kind of thing. This is this kind of thing. And we actually need to create these different recipes that do different things in order to serve different kinds of content the best. I'll also say that it's like, so it's like, I think the point is valid, which is like, you can't just create a card that's going to handle all content types and all the different kinds of content that could live inside of it equally well. That would be pretty ambitious to do that. And I think that this REI example is a good example of where it's like, wow, there's some opportunity to really maybe differentiate these things in a way that would serve users better. And I think a case could be made for that for sure. But yeah, so that's a little bit where it's just like, this doesn't get handled at the sort of design system layer. All the design system layer could do is make sure that all the sort of raw materials are there to assemble whatever it is you need to assemble.
So could it though? Could it and should it? So if I want, like, let's take another example, like let's say, or we can continue with REI. So REI, one of they have some new things coming out where they have also their outlet and they're doing more and more with used stuff. So actually like having a used product market, which might be a totally different website. It might even be an app too. Like maybe I can download the REI, used equipment app.
Yep.
These are all products, right? We have a used product, we have a new product, and we have an outlet product. And like what attributes do they have that are the same? Which attributes do they have that are different? How can does a review for a used product differ from a review for a new product? Like actually is the structure of it different? Because I'm going to review a used product differently. I'm going to talk about how like the crack doesn't matter at all. Like it works totally fine. And also an outlet product as well. The fact that it's part of a sale and it has original price and, and then, existing price. Can that kind of stuff go into a design system? Because I want that, because what when the user comes into a system, they're not, when they learn about a thing, they're not necessarily going to remember whether they learned it from the app or they learned it from the website. They're going back and forth between these things. So if I have a structure of how a used product looks and the structure of that, and then I go onto the website, those should be the same unless there's a really good reason. Like the star rating should be in the same place. The price should be in the same place. I want to reduce cognitive load, reduce development effort as much as possible. Yeah. So the fact that here's our generalized product, here's the 3 variants of a product, and here's maybe some variants among them, like if you purchased it versus on the way. So additional states of that product. And we want it to look the same. Doesn't matter if it's on this website or on this app. Can that stuff go into a design system? Have you ever seen anything like that?
I can, and that's kind of what I was alluding to a little bit earlier, which is just hey, all of this stuff needs thoughtfully considered and like thought about in a systematic way. I know design system, and then like it all gets sort of thrown in the same stew.
Hmm.
And then what ends up happening is that you end up having 70 different cards in your design system, and it becomes super unwieldy because
Hmm.
like different types of the kind of, it's not that that thinking doesn't matter. Of course, that's like absolutely critical to create these great user experiences. It's to sort of ponder these things and
Hmm.
sweat the details and establish the right patterns and conventions and make sure the star ratings are always in the right place and that these things are more conducive for these things than whatever. All of that stuff, super helpful. It's just we're kind of like setting like it just happens at a different layer in the layer cake than
Hmm.
the sort of like lowest level UI component library. And again, it's the good sort of corollary for like REI is like if they have like outlets and sort of like product and like these different kind of flavors of things is like how Google has, well, we use a card on YouTube in a certain way, and we use a
Hmm.
card in Google Shopping in a certain way, and so on and so forth. And it's like they need to be consistent. There are sort of consistent UX guidelines and stuff and content guidelines that can actually sort of be shared between all of them, irrespective of the product they're in. And those are very interesting things. And then there's sort of these things that we're talking about. It's like they need to be consistent within their own sort of universe, which is like the
Hmm.
product universe. So it's like for REI's outlet, you would want those sort of things, those sort of product cards and stuff to really sort of be used consistently. So those recipes, those like card recipes, ought to be used consistently throughout the whole experience. And they might share some commonalities with rei.com, like their regular site. And you can sort of like, you should put that somewhere and you should capture that somewhere. But it tends not to, it tends to live at a place that's either like a sibling or sort of sitting on top of the action, the lowest level kind of primitive
Hmm.
design system. So it's again, it's like nuance is the name of the game here, because I think like what we're talking about is like we want to sort of carefully consider and craft all of this stuff for consistency, for reuse, for quality, for all this stuff. But it's like that doesn't necessarily need to mean that like they all like live together
Hmm.
under one roof, because it actually gets very crowded when you're trying to do all these different kinds of thinking in the exact same place.
Isn't that a lot of what I hear about with okay, we don't want, and you've used this metaphor. I've heard Dan Mall use this metaphor that I love. And I don't know who said it first, but like often design systems are just sort of a bucket of IKEA parts without any rules on how to put it together, or a bucket of Lego parts, whatever your metaphor you want to use, without the
Sure.
rules on like, okay, this is how we put these things together. Is that not a big part of that? Of like, okay, here you have a star rating and you have you have a header, you have a star rating, and you have a card, and you have an image, and you have and this is how all these things, this is how we should put these things together to actually create something with semantic meaning.
Yeah. 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 There's a relationship, right? So
Mhm.
IKEA parts is actually a good one. And then it's like sort of like the layer on top of it is I'm making a mound dresser. And so
Wow.
I'm going to take these specific screws and these specific sort of like the funky little sort of bracket sort of things. And like we have IKEA has an inventory of these like low level parts. Each one of these like little screws, each one of those
Mm-hmm.
little components has their own properties to them. They have their own sort of things that they sort of, affordances that they're generally good at, dowel rods, and like, oh, they're kind of, they lend themselves to these types of applications. And the what's being built using those dowel rods and screws will ultimately influence what those components need to be and what is sort of
Mm-hmm.
properties they need to exhibit, but they aren't the ones sort of saying what the Malm dresser should be. Like it influences it
Mm-hmm.
and it impacts it. And obviously you can't build the dresser without those lower level parts, those component pieces. But it's ultimately like how this all of those lower level components come together ultimately happens a degree removed from the sort of super low level boring component inventory that like
Yeah.
we as IKEA customers, we are not even subjected to that stuff, right?
Right.
We only receive it in the form of the Malm dresser package that you receive. And that's kind of like a beautiful thing. Like the components
Mm-hmm.
that make up that sort of Malm dresser are only facing the sort of IKEA employees that and designers and the people sort of like actually like putting these kits kind of together. And that's like maybe like a good sort of parallel for it's like the low
Mm-hmm.
level UI components are the sort of screws and the dowel rods of the IKEA universe. And that's kind of like back office kind of stuff. And then sort of the step above is a little bit more interesting because it's like that's something real,
Mm-hmm.
that the REI outlet product that has real users using the thing, and it's like it's pulling from this lower level
Right.
in order to build this thing, but it's only really at that level that you're starting to like sort of figure out how this stuff hangs together and is orchestrated. And like what it translates to from a UI perspective is you could go, oh, like this thing actually like falls apart here, maybe we need to go fetch another piece from the UI library that's maybe more conducive to solve this
Mm-hmm.
kind of problem or something like that. So it's interesting. But yeah,
And that's where it
layers.
comes to like it can go either way, right? Like, okay, look, we want to build this dresser. What parts do we have? Oh, we need a new part because this is a new dresser that we haven't had before. Or, you know what? We already have this dresser. Like, we don't need to create another dresser. We have this dresser. We just need to like create a variation of this dresser. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I know we're coming up on time. So I want one more question to ask you, which is
Sure.
kind of a different version of the question I just asked. But so imagine you are on a project and you are lucky enough to be blessed to have an OOUXer on your project. So that person basically is going to be really good at identifying what those things are. So going in and saying, all right, we've got flights, we've got legs, we've got segments. Here's the relationships. We've got so if it's maybe a back end system, we've got agencies, we've got incentive homes, we've got P&Rs. Like, wait, what is a P&R? Oh, P&R is this, and this is how it relates to a ticket, and this is how it relates to companies. Like all that complexity and mapping all like entity relationship diagram style, mapping all the relationships. Like a segment has this many legs, an incentive home has one agency. Then going in and inventorying all the functionality. So what do different types of users do to all of these things? Who
Mm-hmm.
creates the thing? What's coming from an API? And then going into attributes. So what is the structure of each of these things? So a flight has one origin airport, one destination airport, and et cetera, et cetera. It has a date, it has a time, it has a number, and here's the prioritization. So that person is really good at doing that. Okay.
Sure.
Does that person belong on the design system team? And if so, how do they fit in?
Uh, the answer is no. They don't belong on the design system team. Now that said, there's a version of that person whose job it is to interface with all the other OOUXers that are embedded on each of the product teams, the
Uh-huh.
REI outlet team, the REI.com team, the events team, and stuff like that. That's able to sort of serve as the catcher of the common patterns that ought to live and sort of be consistent across all these products. But really, like what you just described is product level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like these are the people who are like really where the rubber meets the road of like good user-centric design, and they're the ones sort of solving like the hard problems of like triangulating the needs of the user with the needs of the business and like all of that stuff in order to make that go. And that tends to play out at the product level now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so it's like who does live at the design system level that can sort of work with those people to basically sort of pull the sort of common sort of threads, or the sort of common patterns and stuff like into a lower place, which again might be, we'll sort of make a distinction between the sort of nuts and bolts dowel rods and screws of like the sort of user interface land, and sort of something that might sort of sit as a sibling, which is like the sort of content guidelines. Like MailChimp's a good example of that. It's like they have like a component library, but then they have their whole sort of like, it's like voice and tone, but like how to talk to your user, how to structure their content, how to do all that. Those are siblings. They're both very important, but they're not one and the same. And then sort of similarly, like there's like these kind of, here's these products across our entire organization. Here's these UX considerations that we want to have, and we want each of our teams, irrespective of the type of product they're working on, we want the principles and the patterns and sort of certain things to be consistent, irrespective of the context. That's the kind of stuff that like lives at that like lowest level, that like purely like shared level. Like anybody ought to be able to sort of use these solutions that are sort of at the bedrock level of like a design system and its like siblings, general siblings. And then there's sort of like the layer on top of that is that sort of like product centric world, which is like, we're like B2C versus B2B is like, that's like a good example where it's like, oh, B2C consumer level people have certain, you know, sort of expectations and whatever, whereas business people are maybe like more like B2B is more like power user, where it's like there's a, you know, a finite number of them and they're used to a different set of conventions than like the sort of B2C market or something like that. So it's like you kind of have like the sort of OOUX, like everything you just described. It's like that is like I think like the sweet spot for someone like that is somebody working on B2C product, because they're like, what do the consumers need, or what do those sort of like business users need and whatever. But there is an opportunity for someone like that to be kind of at that sort of lowest level, kind of like working with their peers on the sort of product squads to kind of extract and kind of coordinate a lot of those sort of like like sort of base level patterns, I guess. But yeah, it's very interesting. But the thing that I'm like, I hope I'm articulating it okay. What I'm not doing, and I just want to be clear about this, what I'm not doing is diminishing that role in the slightest.
Yeah.
But what I'm sort of getting at is like there are the design system layer is ultimately kind of like boring commodity. It's like, now I'm just diminishing my own world a little bit, but it's like but it's true. It really gets into, it's like we're making like wooden dowel rods and stuff, and it's like now the exciting thing is in the seam, is in the relationship between like, here's how we make tools that these other people are going to wield expertly, and there's a solid relationship in between those two layers. But it in our experience, it tends to, whenever you kind of bundle it all together, it gets messy.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping, I guess I was hoping, like, because I want to know if there's the person that's going to say, all right, here's what a used product looks like versus a new product within REI. And then here's what a used product looks like on the used app and the used site. So two different, you know, platforms, two different products, but let's make sure that they're consistent. And then even if we pull in with an API and on rei.com proper, we have a product, and we show, hey, we have these 3 used products in your area of the same product, and then it looks the same in all 4 of those places. Like, what? Like, I want to know in an organization, like, where does that person belong? And I was hoping that they could just join the design system party and be on that team. But it sounds like you're saying that they need another place, like that organization, not product level consistency, organization level consistency.
It's yeah. It's like I see it as like a solid sibling to that sort of like the dowel rod makers or like the button makers. It's like and they would obviously have like a very close relationship, but they are in essence like kind of doing different things that all, it's like obviously like that work is super critical work that ultimately feeds a backlog of, we need this new widget to do this new thing. But it's like they're kind of like taking this and sort of like, sort of crafting like this sort of strategy and how all this stuff sort of all hangs together to build great products, good user-centric products and stuff. So it's like, it's the layer cake. And as time goes on, we are like sort of like learning that the design system layer cake is layered, is that there's just different facets to it. And there is this like sort of like pure UI thing that actually like sort of like the less, as time goes on, I'm finding it's like the less kind of product centric sort of stuff, like the only real sort of product centric stuff that tends to manifest itself in our like sort of design systems is like the examples. And material design is a good example of it, where it's just like, if you go to like the floating action button component detail page on material design site, there'll be like, it's the circle button. And then they like have like a bunch of examples. So it's like, here's a bunch of examples from Google Maps and from Gmail and from like all these like kind of different products. And like, that's like really the only time you like really see that product level thing really play out, because ultimately this is the documentation for a wooden dowel rod that tells you what radius it is and what like length it is and stuff, which is like, again, it's boring. It's like it's a boring sort of commodity, and it's kind of at this sort of like separate layer that it really kind of gets life breathed into it. And there's like really amazing people who do that stuff. And it's just like, it's a very weird place to be, is to like kind of be excited about that kind of boring stuff. But it's like back to what we're talking about to start off this conversation, which is we're kind of like taking care of that boring stuff. We're providing like tools and infrastructure and just like kind of taking care of some of that just boring stuff, so that the smart OOUX people and the product teams and like all these people are able to focus on the nuance of used product versus outlet product versus new product, and like how best to sort of organize these things. And it's like, without them having to get distracted about border radius values. Right. You know what I mean? So,
right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to make you late to your next meeting. We've already gone all the way up to time. So I think you're late for something, but this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Let's definitely continue the conversation and, just figure out how to make this work better for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. It's been a lot of fun. And I think like there's a lot of opportunity here. And it's like, this is the last thing I'll say is that it's just like, holy smokes, what a young industry and field we're in. And we're all sort of like figuring it all out. And then like, it's just back to names and stuff and concepts. It's like, man, we're inventing this stuff.
We are.
Day in and day out.
I always say, like, we are all pioneers here, and anybody that feels like the market is saturated, like, oh, it's too saturated to get into UX or development. Yeah, it's hilarious, right? Like, no, I think that it's a whole other conversation. I think the industry is trying to figure out how to take all these people in and what to do with them and how to organize them in a way. So we have a problem with entry level folks coming in, but yes, like we need everybody. We need everybody. We are all figuring this out. And definitely the market is not saturated.
Yeah, plenty of room in the pool. Plenty of room in the pool.
Yes, plenty. Thank you so much, Brad. I'll be bothering you sometime next year to do a follow-up. We got through about a third of my questions. So yes, let's definitely continue the conversation. And have a great rest of your day.
Sounds great. Yeah, you too. All right, take care. See you later. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. Please visit objectorientux.com/podcast for show notes. Our soundtrack is Fighter by Ruby Vell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Happy OUXing!